somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, a person ate something they shouldn't have. We'll never know their name. We'll never know what it was. A berry, a leaf, a root, a beautiful little mushroom. But we know roughly what happened next, because it had happened before, and it would happen again. They got sick. Maybe they died. And the people around them, the ones who watched, the ones who survived, remembered. They remembered everything, and that memory passed from mouth to ear. Across hundreds of generations, with no writing, no schools, no science, is the only reason you're alive to watch this. This is the story of how humans learned what was safe to eat, and it might be the most underrated achievement in the entire human story. Here's the thing nobody tells you. When we picture ancient survival, we picture the dramatic stuff. The mammoth hunt, the cave lion, the blizzard, the spear raised against something with teeth. But the truth is, the most relentless, every single day threat to an ancient human wasn't any of that. It was the perfectly innocent-looking thing, sitting on a branch at eye level. Food doesn't roar, food doesn't charge. Food just sits there, looking harmless, and roughly a third of the time, it's trying to kill you, because nature is not your friend. We have this gentle, modern idea that natural means safe, that if it grows out of the ground, it must be wholesome. The plants would like a word. Plants cannot run away. They can't bite, they can't flee, they can't hide. So over hundreds of millions of years, they evolved the only defense available to something rooted to the spot: chemistry. A plant that tastes terrible, or makes you vomit, or stops your heart, is a plant that gets eaten less often. Toxicity is not an accident. For a plant, toxicity is the entire point. Every forest your ancestors walked through was, from the plant's perspective, an arms race. And your ancestors were walking into it 3 times a day, hungry, with nothing but the equipment evolution had given them. So let's talk about that equipment. Because the first line of defense wasn't knowledge. It wasn't culture. It was built into the body itself. Start with taste. That bitterness you hate, the thing that makes kids spit out broccoli, and adults grimace at black coffee before they train themselves to tolerate it. That is not a flaw in your tongue. That is a 400 million-year-old alarm system. Bitterness is the flavor of alkaloids, and alkaloids are the chemical family that includes strychnine, nicotine, morphine, caffeine, and a long list of compounds that range from mildly unpleasant to instantly lethal. Your ancestors who found bitter things disgusting were your ancestors, who didn't eat the deadly bitter things, which is precisely why they got to become your ancestors. The ones with a relaxed attitude toward bitterness tended not to make it into the family tree. Humans have around 25 different types of bitter taste receptors, far more than we have for sweet or salty. Think about what that ratio is telling you. Evolution invested in one good detector for sugar and built 25 separate alarms for poison. That is not a species that expected the world to be safe. That is a species braced for betrayal at every meal. There's a gene some of you have right now called TAS2R38 that determines how intensely you taste certain bitter compounds. Some people are non-tasters, some are super tasters who find the same vegetable almost unbearable. That variation isn't random. It's the surviving echo of an ancient hedge. A group with a range of sensitivities is a group where someone will always flinch at the dangerous plant, even when others won't. And it's not just taste. It's disgust itself. That full body recoil you feel at the smell of rotting meat, the way your face scrunches and your stomach turns, that is one of the oldest protective programs your brain runs. Disgust is, at its core, a system for not putting deadly things in your mouth. The expression is even the same across every culture on Earth. The wrinkled nose, the curled lip, because it's not learned. It's standard human hardware. Your ancestors who found decay revolting avoided the bacteria that decay carries. The ones who didn't, again, tend not to be anyone's ancestors. So the body gives you a starter kit. Bitter is danger, rotten is death, sweet is probably energy. But here's where it gets interesting, because that starter kit is nowhere near enough. Plenty of deadly plants aren't bitter. Plenty of safe foods are. The body's instincts are a blunt first filter, and an ancient human, relying on instinct alone, would still be playing a very dangerous game. So humans did what humans do best. They got clever. Strategy 1 was simple, brilliant, and brutal. The small dose. When you encounter a new potential food, you don't sit down and eat a bowl of it. You take a tiny amount. You rub it on your lips, your skin, and you wait. Does it tingle? Does it burn? Does it blister? If it does, you stop. If it doesn't, you taste a crumb and you wait again, hours sometimes. Then a little more. Then you wait a full day. This is, remarkably, almost exactly the protocol that modern wilderness survival guides still teach as the universal edibility test. And it wasn't invented in a manual. It was the accumulated logic of a species that had learned, the hardest possible way, that the difference between food and poison is often a difference of dose. The small dose strategy doesn't make a poison safe, but it turns a fatal mistake into a survivable one. It buys the one thing an ancient human needed most, a second chance. Strategy 2 was even smarter. Don't be the one who tests it at all. Watch something else do it first. Ancient humans were relentless observers of animals, and not just as prey. If you watch a bird gorge on a particular berry, that berry probably won't kill a bird, which is useful information, even if it's not a guarantee. There's an old, hard-won wisdom embedded in this. Watch what the animals eat. It's imperfect, because some things a bird can eat will harm a human, and the reverse. But as a starting filter, in a world with no other information, it tilted the odds. Some researchers think this is part of how early humans found valuable foods, like certain fruits, and even fermenting fallen fruit. We followed the appetites of creatures who'd already paid the tuition. And strategy 3, the rule that ties it all together. Change one thing at a time. If you're going to try something new, try only one new thing. And try it when nothing else is uncertain. Because if you eat 3 unfamiliar plants in an afternoon and you get violently ill, you've learned almost nothing. Which one was it? You've suffered for no usable knowledge. But if you change one variable and you get sick, now you know. Now you can tell the others. Now it goes into the database. This is, quietly, the scientific method. Isolate the variable, observe the result. Record it. Share it. Ancient humans were running controlled experiments, with their own bodies as the laboratory, thousands of years before anyone wrote down a single rule of science. They just paid for their data in a currency we no longer use. Now here's where the story goes from impressive to genuinely astonishing. Because so far we've been talking about how ancient humans avoided poison. But at some point, they did something far stranger and far more brilliant. They started eating the poison on purpose and surviving. Let me explain, because this is the part that should stop you cold. There is a plant called cassava, also known as manioc. Today it feeds something like 500 million people. It is a staple, a foundation, a daily food across huge regions of Africa, South America, and Asia. It is also, in its bitter wild form, loaded with compounds that release cyanide when you eat them. Raw, bitter cassava can kill you. Not metaphorically, cyanide. The same poison from the spy movies. And yet entire civilizations built themselves on this plant. How? Because somebody, across uncountable generations of trial and error, worked out an elaborate, multi-step process to render it safe. Depending on the tradition, you peel it, you grate it, you soak it, you ferment it, you press the liquid out, you let it sit, you cook it, sometimes over days. Each step removes a little more of the cyanide. Skip a step, do it wrong, rush it, and people get sick. There's even a paralytic condition that appears in regions where cassava isn't processed correctly during times of famine, when desperate people cut corners. The knowledge is not optional. The knowledge is the food. Sit with what that actually required. No one understood cyanide. No one understood chemistry, or enzymes, or the molecular structure of anything. Nobody could explain why the soaking worked, or what the fermenting removed. They only knew that this exact sequence of steps, performed in this exact order, turned a plant that killed people into a plant that fed people. And they knew it well enough to teach it, perfectly, to their children, who taught it to their children. For thousands of years, without ever once knowing the why. They had the how. The how was enough. The how kept them alive. And cassava is not alone. Acorns, a massive food source for ancient peoples across the northern hemisphere, are full of bitter tannins that make them inedible and can damage your body if you eat enough raw. So humans learned to leach them, grinding them and rinsing them with water, sometimes for days, sometimes burying them in mud by a stream until the bitterness washed away, and what remained was a nutritious, storable flour. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples processed the Nardu fern and the seeds of the cycad, both seriously toxic in their raw state, through soaking and grinding, and roasting techniques refined over tens of thousands of years. These were not simple foods. These were chemistry projects, run by people who didn't have the word chemistry, executed flawlessly across hundreds of generations, because the alternative was death. And here's the part that turns it from a fun fact into something with weight behind it. We actually have a record of what happens when outsiders try to eat these foods without the knowledge. In 1861, two European explorers in Australia, Burke and Wills, found themselves starving in the outback. Local Aboriginal people were thriving in the same landscape, eating, among other things, that Nardu fern. The explorers got hold of Nardu too. They ground it, they ate a lot of it, and they grew weaker and weaker, and could not understand why, because they were eating, their stomachs were full, and still, their bodies were failing. They didn't know that Nardu has to be prepared a specific way, that the Aboriginal method neutralized a compound that otherwise robs your body of the ability to use vitamin B1. They were eating the same plant as the people who survived. They just didn't have the recipe. And the recipe was 40,000 years of accumulated knowledge that you could not reverse engineer from a starving afternoon. They died, or near enough, of starvation, with full stomachs, surrounded by food, because food without the knowledge of how to prepare it isn't food. It's a trap that looks like food. That, more than anything, is the answer to our question. How did ancient humans know what was safe to eat? They knew because someone before them had figured it out and refused to let the knowledge die. Let's talk about that, because it's the real engine of this entire story. Not taste, not instinct, not even individual cleverness. The thing that actually kept the species alive was transmission. The passing of knowledge from one mind to the next, accurately, repeatedly, across enormous spans of time. Think about what a human group actually was in this light. It was a living library. An elder in a hunter-gatherer band wasn't just an old person. They were a database. They carried in their memory the identity of hundreds of plants. Which ones fed you? Which ones healed you? Which ones killed you? Which looked safe but weren't? Which were safe only in spring, or only once cooked, or only if you threw the first water away? Which mushroom was dinner, and which mushroom was the one that took your cousin 30 years ago? That knowledge had no backup. It existed in living heads and in spoken words, and absolutely nowhere else. Which means every time an elder died before passing it on, a piece of the library burned. This is why ancient cultures treated their elders the way they did, and why so many wrapped this knowledge in story, in ritual, in song, because a dry list of 300 plants is almost impossible to remember. But a story, a song, a vivid warning with a frightening character in it that sticks. Culture wasn't decoration laid on top of survival. Culture was the storage medium. The myths and the taboos and the songs were the hard drive, and the format was chosen over thousands of years, precisely because it was the format a human brain could actually keep. When a culture said, "This plant is sacred and may only be touched after this ritual," that wasn't superstition getting in the way of practicality. Very often, that was practicality, encoded in the only language that could survive the centuries. And this is the thing I really want you to feel. There was no shortcut. Every single safe food you take for granted was paid for. Somebody, somewhere, was the first to find out that this was poison, and they usually found out by dying. The knowledge that a particular berry is deadly is not free information that was always just lying around. It is the fossilized memory of a real person's death, carried forward by the people who loved them and didn't want it to happen again. Your safe, boring grocery store, with its labels and its certainty, sits on top of an invisible cemetery of people who tested the world with their own bodies, so that, eventually, you wouldn't have to. Now, I want to be honest about something, the way I always try to be. We tend to tell this story as a triumph, and it is. But the system was not perfect, and pretending it was does a disservice to how hard it actually was. Mushrooms, in particular, were and remain a nightmare, because some of the deadliest ones look almost identical to safe ones, and the deadliest of all, like the aptly named death cap, taste fine, sit easy in your stomach, let you go to sleep feeling fine, and then destroy your liver over the following days, long after the meal is forgotten. There is no instinct that catches that. Bitterness doesn't warn you, disgust doesn't warn you. The small dose test fails because the dose that kills you is small, and the symptoms are delayed. This is exactly the kind of threat that pure instinct cannot solve, and it's exactly why the cultural knowledge mattered so much. The only defense against the death cap was someone generations ago learning to recognize it on sight and teaching everyone else to fear it specifically. Where that teaching held, people lived. Where it broke, where a group was displaced, or migrated to a new land with unfamiliar species, or lost its elders too fast, people died. Moving to a new environment was genuinely dangerous because your entire inherited food map was suddenly wrong. The plants were different. The library didn't cover this section, and you had to start writing it again in the old currency. So when you zoom all the way out, what were ancient humans actually doing every day for 300,000 years? They were running the longest continuous research program in human history. No funding, no labs, no publication, just observation, experiment, memory, and transmission, repeated across 10,000 generations. They isolated variables. They ran trials. They recorded results in the only medium they had, which was each other. They built, collectively, an astonishingly accurate body of practical pharmacology and nutrition, and they did it without writing a word of it down. We call them primitive. They were running science. They just published their findings in songs and paid their research costs in lives. And here's where it comes back to you, sitting wherever you're sitting right now. The next time you eat something, anything, the most ordinary snack imaginable, I want you to notice that you did not have to wonder if it would kill you. You reached out and you ate with total, unthinking confidence. That confidence is not natural. That confidence is the single greatest inheritance your species has ever handed down. It is the end product of an unbroken chain of human beings. Stretching back further than you can picture, every one of them paying attention, remembering, and telling the next person what they learned. You are the living edge of that chain. The knowledge reached you. It made it. Across all that time, across all those deaths, the message got through, mouth to ear, all the way to you, and the message was simple. This one's safe. We checked, so you wouldn't have to. So here's my question for you. If you had to start over, in a forest you'd never seen, with no labels and no certainty, do you think you'd survive long enough to learn? Let me know in the comments. Until then, take care of yourselves and eat something today, knowing exactly how much it costs to make it safe. I'll see you soon.